Morning, and we're live talking about deal closing, and that is closing deals that have lots of decision makers. Now, they say that there are 10 to 12 decision makers involved in complex deals nowadays. Janice, you were telling me earlier it's more like 20. And so this is why we're here today, to give you some practical tips and really hear your questions as well on how you can get your deals closing. So just before Janice introduces herself, please let me know in the comments, how are things for you at the moment? I think for a lot of people, deal closing is a little bit tough. There's been delays on decisions, deals that perhaps have not sort of dropped when you would expect them to. This session is for salespeople, sales leaders, marketers that are helping salespeople to close deals. So let me know in the comments, just so that we know who is listening. We would really welcome your questions. Are you finding it challenging at the moment, or are your deals all ready to drop? If you're a salesperson, give us a pitch. This is absolutely pitches here on your LinkedIn comments. So I'm over to you, Janice, because the comments can take a little bit of time to come through. Do you want to just quickly introduce yourself and how you help salespeople?
I'd love to. Thank you for inviting me to this live. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Yes, I'm Janice B. Do not forget my B, Janice B. Gordon, the customer growth expert. I'm the founder of Scale Your Sales podcast and Scale Your Sales framework. My focus is really focusing on your customers and your buyers. If they win, you as sellers win too. So often organizations, the sales process, if you think of it, it's all focusing on selling. And what we need to do is focus on the buying process. And we're going to be talking a bit about that here, but also really understanding that the sales operations are going to get smaller as we go forward. So I really help organizations to make sure they have the right people in the right seats that are going to achieve target consistently, go over a period of time. So it's making sure you're having an efficient sales operation. Now, I know we're talking to small, medium sales operations on this line, or on this live in the main. So we're really going to be focusing on deal management and understanding your buyers' priorities so that you can secure more deals more often.
And consistency is key, isn't it? And I think that when there are so many decision makers, that there can be so many things that are unexpected that can come from these decision makers. But why do you think there are so many people involved in decisions? Why does that keep going up, the number of people who are getting involved in our deals?
I know it's nuts. It's kind of grown from, as your comments, 8 to 12 and now up to 20. And when we're talking up to 20, a lot of them are invisible, unknown to you. And so the reason why that has happened is the pandemic. Everyone was online. It's easier to get more people around the table. And so they wanted to reduce the risks. Budgets are decreasing, and that has continued post-pandemic. So decreasing the risk means increasing the eyes, the number of stakeholders to mitigate that risk. But the problem with that, it becomes more complex, and it's more complex for you as a salesperson selling into an organization. They're risk averse. They don't want to make a mistake. And so they're crossing their T's and dotting their I's and passing it through all different stakeholders. And this is why we've got to operate differently than we used to.
Really true. And I think that sometimes because there's such a plethora of information on the internet, that even if this person wouldn't normally come under their remit, I think that lots of people have lots of opinions on things that are sort of slightly beyond their scope. I'm not saying that they're interfering or anything like that, but as soon as you might have an opinion on something, you then get looped into the decision-making committee because, oh, this person knows something about it. I've heard them talking about it. So let's bring them in as well. And it's really, it's really sort of freezing the decision-making process, isn't it? And I think the champion still exists, and it's the champion that we might have in, with our buyers that can help you to navigate the organization and get it through. Are you finding that the champion is still important for your deals?
I think the champion is important, but the one thing I wanted to say, Laura, is that the biggest barrier to deal success is the status quo, because you've got so many people that are trying to mitigate risks. It's become so much more complex and complicated that in the end, your biggest barrier to the sale is actually, well, let's just, it's just too much. Let's just, we can live with the problem that we've got. We've lived with it for the last 5 years. It's too much. This is too difficult. There isn't the impetus. We've lost momentum. And your job is to manage that deal so it doesn't lose momentum. So you imagine yourself having 20 spinning plates and you can't let any of them fall. So deal management has become so much more important than it was previously. So your role has changed. Yes, it's consensus sell in the way that you sell, but actually it used to be that the process of selling took up a great deal of your focus, but actually it's now about project management, managing the deal through the buying process. And yes, the champion is important, but actually it's the stakeholders, understanding the stakeholders who has influence over that deal.
Yeah. And when you're looking at an account, so we're talking about enterprise selling, and you think about how do I get myself, perhaps you haven't got an open opportunity yet. You're still, you're looking at this company that would be strategically important to your company to close that deal. How do you find your pathways into that account in the first place? Do you have any tips on that?
Yeah, I would always map out a complex deal. So I would start with, okay, who is my champion? And there's two levels of champions. There's those that championing you and those that champion the deal. So it's understanding the two. Which one have you got? So the person that's championing you may not be a senior leader in the organization, but they're the ones that's giving you information and helping you to understand who's involved in that deal, who are the decision makers. So you've got that person and it may be your level of relationship with that person may be from 1 to 5, 5 being the top. Level 5, they absolutely love you. They've worked with you in a different organization. You've had a longer term relationship with you. They want you to get the deal. But their level of influence on that deal may be a 1. So now you need to map out who else is sitting around that deal table. And so you may have, the boss's boss, you may have finance might have an involvement, product management, marketing, whoever it may be in that deal, because it depends on your product. Then you want to map out what is your level of relationship. Do they know you? Or do they not? Is it a 0? Now, if their influence is 5, influence on that deal going ahead, but your relationship is below a 2 and below, the likelihood of that deal going forward is reduced, and not reduced by 20%, probably by about 80%. It's not happening, right?
Yeah.
So you've got to build the relationship before you need the relationship. So this is kind of a long-term engagement. That's a company that you're interested in, that your product is relevant to their needs, and you're starting to research that organization. And so one thing that I would absolutely start with in terms of your way into the organization is understanding that organization, understand the seats, the priorities, the preferences of the people around the decision-making unit.
And I think that sometimes salespeople feel a little bit frightened about upsetting their champion. Like it could be perceived that you've gone over their head when they're doing quite a good job in navigating you through an organization. And my way that I would recommend to salespeople would be that LinkedIn is such a soft approach. If you met somebody out networking and it happened to be somebody in the decision-making unit of a company that you're selling to, and you've got a 1 or 2 champion, you would absolutely speak to them about what you know about their business, get the information, say, oh, by the way, I know so-and-so, and that would happen in face-to-face networking. So why are salespeople not doing it with online networking? On LinkedIn, we can be connecting to all of the decision-making unit, maybe before you even get to the point of speaking to them, start sort of popping up and getting yourself known. I think that sort of connecting before you need them is really important, because when your deal's going south, and then you start connecting to the decision-making unit, it's a bit late by then. And I think that's the trap that we can all fall into if we've not got a head on that. Don't you think?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I was thinking when you were talking, Laura, we often have a different language when we're online to what we would have face to face. And, the way that we speak, and what we've got to do is imagine that person in front of us and speak to them in the way that we would if they were in front of us. If you're a bit quirky in your language, sometimes, I must say that at this time, we're not going to have as many people from across the pond, but, we've got a certain sense of humor in the UK. And, sometimes I may throw that out there, and I know it's probably, what on earth is she talking about? Because it's our UK sense of humor. Well, I'm not going to change that. That's just who I am. And the people that get it instantly love me. I've built a relationship with them really quickly, and they love that quirkiness. So what we need to do is talk to people online as if they're in front of us, and build up that personality-based relationship with them. So I love what you say, Laura. Think of it as if you are having a live networking with them.
Yeah. Let's talk about some sort of practicalities on understanding who the buying group are and how to engage with them. Do you have any tips about like how to just get started with that? You might be used to doing the sales where you're talking to 1 or 2 people, they introduce you to their boss, and that's the kind of deal making that you're used to doing. How do you change it up and suddenly consider 20 decision makers?
Well, I talked about the mapping. So you've got those 20 decision makers, and you understand how much influence they have on the deal, and how much what relationship you have with them, what's the level of your relationship. So now you've actually mapped that out. What you need to do is understand their priorities and their preferences. How do they like you to communicate with them? Is it more formal? Is it more informal? What is their favorite subject area? And you can do that by reading their articles, understand their language, look at their role, understand the person, if it's a finance person, what's the thing that's top of mind for that person in that role, regardless of the company? What's the language that they use, which is going to be very different to product development and a marketing person. So really understand their preferences and their priorities, their language, look at their company statements as well. What is the focus of the organization going forward? That's the opening gambit in terms of the conversation you would have with that individual. You want to query, is this still important to you? This is what I've read. This is where I found out this information. Is this important to you?
Yeah. And I think you can connect those company strategic goals to, you're almost making an assumption that if they work in that role, if you consider that these are the company strategic goals, then probably X, Y, and Z is going to be a priority. Because one of the things that I often hear from salespeople is, yeah, well, that CFO is the person I need to contact, but there's hardly anything on their LinkedIn profile and they're not posting, so I don't really know. And it's a little bit like a jigsaw puzzle that you're needing to create. One tip I would give people is have a look at other people in their department. Sometimes somebody more junior might be a lot more explicit about what they're working on. They might be wanting to sort of boast about that a little bit on LinkedIn more than a senior person would. And if you look at quite a lot of people in their department, you can really understand the projects that are happening. And what's interesting is all of this information is here at our fingertips if we look hard enough. And yet we make a lot of assumptions in sales, don't we, when we get in touch with people? And because you don't know what they're interested in, you default back onto talking about your solution rather than connecting it to their needs. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of work to do in that mapping, really, isn't there?
But once you've done it, you can use that as your kind of leaping off point all the time. It's got to be relevant to them at that point in time. And another way is, we often start on LinkedIn and then we go offline, but these people are attending conferences and trade shows, and those events can be relatively dry. And so imagine that they may be hosting a show, so they're going to be there. So why not contact them on LinkedIn with relevant information? Said, I love to have a conversation with you. Are you and try and get to see them at the conference or at the trade show. I'd love to take you for a coffee. Sometimes they need a break and they think, who on earth is this person? But very few people ask. And the fact that you've asked and you've said, I know you're going to be there, I'd love to take you out for a coffee, let's meet at 8 o'clock before the conference or something like that. And they will often say yes, simply because no one else has asked them. Now you're in front of them. It's not about you, it's all about them. So offer them something that they do not already know. Do your research. And you're building up trust because I think, actually, this person's done their research. And then say, you want to know their perspective. What are their priorities? And am I right in thinking X, Y, and Z? Is this really your priority? You said that. Does this mean this?
Yeah, exactly. I love how you're talking about using real life in relation to LinkedIn, because I think that so many times I'm having conversations about how LinkedIn is part of the mix of channels. And I think there's this, LinkedIn is going to solve everything, or it's all about, and it's about mixing up those channels. And I think that's important for the discovery that we're talking about and the mapping of the needs as well. But just in terms of staying front of mind, I do think that when you've had that in-person meeting, we have loads of phone calls, don't we? Loads of video calls. We might be on video, but can you remember every single call you had last month? As a salesperson, you might remember those people, but actually it could get a bit ropey. Are they going to remember you to that level of, and I think that blending in whether it's WhatsApp or email and getting face to face, but then sort of LinkedIn is a great place to just stay front of mind as well, isn't it?
It is. And you've just reminded me, you're on video calls a lot. Are you using AI? Are you using AI that will give you the top talking points? And are you then sending that to the decision maker so that they are going to remember you? Because not enough people are doing that you follow up. These are the things we talked about. These are the actions that we said. This is what I'm going to do by this time, and we said we would follow up. We'd never leave a call unless there is a follow-up, and there's a mark in the sand. What happens next? What, not only what you are going to do, but what are they going to do based on what you're going to do? You've got to follow that up, so that in an email or in a message to them, so that they do remember you, and do it literally seconds after you've had that call. AI, it's all there for you.
Yeah. One thing that we found AI quite useful for is to, sort of like later on when you're doing your follow-ups, is that your follow-ups can become less relevant to them over time, because you've kind of lost the boil of the things that really interested them. And so I really love those, going back to original AI notes and sort of utilizing not just their needs, but also their language. What were the words that they used to describe the thing that, you might use slightly different words for, and just saying that back to them. And to take it to another level is putting that into LinkedIn posts, getting your team connected to them as well, and getting your team to be writing posts using that language and talking about the things that are important to them. It's just that sort of, it's a little bit more subliminal when you're talking about the content, but you can often connect the content that your company's coming out with anyway with their needs, and just making sure that they're seeing that content coming out, because it just helps them to remind, I guess it's all about reminding them of the priorities that they told you about on the call. I know when we were talking before, you said something that really resonated with me about their priorities, because we sometimes forget to ask, don't we?
Well, yeah, you can't you can't. We know that so much is changing, and you have no idea of how much is changing in the potential customer's organization. So you've got to continue to reassess: is this still a priority? Are we still, what is the momentum here? Has it changed? You don't just do that at the beginning when you're doing needs assessment, you're doing that all the way through. So often deals would take a year, 6 months. So, think of like that in quarters of the deal cycle. Every quarter you're reassessing, you're asking that question again. So you might have a quarterly meeting where you start with, is this still important to you? Is this still a priority? What has changed in your organization? Is there someone else that needs to be involved in this that's just come in halfway through? Do not think that deals are stagnant, and where you started is where you're going to end. So you've got to continually to reassess, is there still a budget here? Has it moved on? Has it decreased? So that you're making sure that you're offering the deal that they want and they need, or offering them where they are in that moment in time, because it's constantly changing.
Yeah. And when we get told, oh, this is going to go into next year's budget, and you're like, brilliant, I'm in there. It's how many times has that not come to fruition? You think that you're in the budget, but as you say, we're just business priorities are changing all the time. One thing that is, I think, really important to get underneath is, what budget line are you coming from? When does that kick in? And is there an opportunity to do something like a proof of concept, or get into this year's budget? Like next year's budget might be kicking in 3 months' time, and you might, as a salesperson, go, great, I'm in there in 3 months' time. But anything can change, as we know. Get that deal signed, because things change quite quickly. And but it can be quite uncomfortable asking about budget lines, I think. And one tactic that I found works quite well is, if you split that intro call into 2 parts, do a bit of discovery on the first part, have a reason to have a second call which will add some value, and then once you have added that value, they go, okay, you've told me something that I don't know, you've come back with something that is good, then you've built that trust over the 2 calls in order to then help them to open up a bit more about their budgets. I think sometimes people are a little bit closed about wanting to admit how much money they've got and what else is going, what else you're competing against, if they're not ready for that. And it's about timing that budget conversation, I find. And one thing that I personally have found a little bit easier is when I say to people, well, what we do doesn't naturally fall into this budget. It could end up in this budget or that budget. And I kind of put it back onto myself that that's a problem that we have as a company. And, from your mind, where would this come from? But you've also got them thinking, oh, actually, it could also come from that budget line or that one, or maybe we can share that with my colleague who looks after to that budget. And if you don't get under the skin of where the money's coming from, and that's another way that deals are walking out the door, as well as your champion leaving the company as well, which we really need to dig into as well. Any thoughts about deals walking out the door, whether it's budgets or champions leaving, that you think you can do to try and prop them up?
Well, deals walking out the door can be, I mentioned the status quo, but also not reassessing what are the priorities as well. And also, you mentioned about mentioned about kind of like putting together a pilot or signing it off early, getting it at this year's. It is really uncomfortable having those conversations, but it very much depends on the kind of relationship that you have. If you're feeling uncomfortable, then that other person's going to feel uncomfortable. So I would say that you need to practice in front of these mirrors those types of conversations, so that when you go into the conversations, it feels quite natural. But also thinking about, this is the way we do business. This is, our policies, and, our customers like the way that this has worked. Give them examples and case studies. So you can say, in other deals, this is what we have done. So you're actually removing yourself out of it. This is, and it's worked really well. Would this work in your organization? So that you're removing the discomfort away from yourself. So I kind of offer that as well.
That's a really good tip. And sometimes our deals take a while to get over the line. And I read some quite shocking stats that if you're selling to marketers, CMOs move jobs every 18 months to 24 months. So say you're talking to a CMO that's a year in and your deal takes more than 6 months to close, you might actually lose that champion, that budget holder. And I think when you feel that you've got the buy-in from your main decision maker, you can be feeling like you don't need to engage with everybody else because you've got the budget holder there. But then what happens when they move on from the company? And I think that's one of the reasons that you need to have that multi-stakeholder engagement. But I think that another way, if you think about it earlier in the process, 84% of deals are done via that come from a referral in the first place. And we think about client referrals, we think about partner referrals, but actually I'm starting to think more about internal referrals. Like perhaps one of these stakeholders, one of these people in your target company could be referring you into the main buying group of your deal. Do you have any sort of thoughts on the referral side of things and how you can really try and get into companies that way?
Certainly, referrals is the way to go. But that look is, you need to look at your own profile. You need to look at how you're engaging with people and the relationships that you have, because you're in it for the long game. You will find lots of referrals in your own network, lots and lots of referrals. But it's how well you nurturing your network. How often are you adding value to your network and being open with your net? Are you posting regularly? previously you talked about the conversations, and I thought about, well, the conversations you have without naming names, but you may actually have a problem that you're discussing with a client. Well, why not then turn that into an article about here, here is 10 ways to solve this problem, something like that, because other people in your network are going to have similar problems as well. So that's way of continuing to engage your network with relevant conversations.
Yeah. Talking about content, it seems like an opportunity to mention your podcast, Janice. Do a little
Yes.
plug for that.
Yes, Scale Your Sales podcast. There should be a link in the comments, but it's scaleyourselves.co.uk/podcast. That's the website, and from there you can get to the video show, which is on my YouTube channel, and all of the favorite networks, whether it's iTunes or Spotify. You'll find Scale Your Sales podcast there. Now, I've interviewed you, Laura, a few times, which is brilliant, but also other executives, the people that you're trying to sell to, so it's executives and many other kind of sales influencers and leaders offering strategic advice to how to access our buyers.
Fantastic. I would recommend giving that a listen. It's you're full of brilliant advice, and you shared one with me earlier, which really, really resonated. And it was about how we can sometimes be losing our own deals. You talk about the status quo, but about aligning, the rest of our organization to support your sales. Would you like to talk about that? Because I thought that it was such a important point.
Yeah, we often have not looking internally about how we sell. How customers with larger organizations, they want everything now, and so they do really fast and then they do slow, fast, slow. So once they request something, they want it immediately because they have a short kind of attention span, and they're talking about something, they request some information from you, and then they move on. That information goes to other people in the organization. So it may take weeks before that comes back to you because you've got to have lots of eyes over it. But you cannot miss the boat. Once they request something, you've got to provide it quickly, immediately. So your organization's got to be well aligned, whether it's finance, whether it's product, whether it's marketing, all of that information that they need from you, you've got to be able to supply it quickly. So you have to have an organization that's slick, that's fluid, that's aligned. Have all of that information readily available for your customers so you can react really quickly. But understand, once you've sent it, do not expect to reply quickly. It's a large organization. The important thing is to focus on getting that information that they need at that point in time that's relevant to them in order to move the deal on. But the deal will then slow down before it speeds up again.
Yeah. And then remember that when they've said, I need this for Thursday, that you drop them a little note or a video or voice note or something on Thursday morning to check that it was fit for purpose, just to remind them to be running, that you've sent that through so it doesn't get forgotten when they go into their meetings. I think that we could probably keep on chatting all morning, Janice, but I think we're probably at the point where there's been a lot there. Should we, I don't know whether you had any other key points, but maybe it's time for a bit of a key takeaway and a roundup. What would you want people to go away from this live, implement, or just keep in mind as they're going into their sales with lots of decision makers?
I think you've always got to be personable and remember that it's not about you. It's all about what are their priorities as an individual. So you're appealing to the individual, not the organization. Of course, you've got to understand their role and the priorities of the organization, but you have a relationship with the individual, the human. So really understand their priorities and their preferences. Now, the priorities of one person is going to be different to another person. And that's why it's a complex deal. So you have got to got to map out all of those stakeholders. What is your relationship with the key stakeholders and decision makers, and who are the other champions and influencers on that deal? Once you've got it mapped out, you understand their priorities, their language, it's going to be a lot easier for you to navigate a complex deal.
Thank you, Janice. And I would say that getting connected to them early and tracking them and keeping front of mind by engaging with their content is just one of the tactics you can be doing on top of that. And, I feel that if we could just follow your advice, we would be inundated with closed deals. So just so many great tips. It's been absolutely wonderful speaking to you today. I'm going to play the outro, and so I will say goodbye for now and speak to you very soon.
Thank you.